So, if you want to understand the incredibly tense, like rapidly shifting crisis in the Middle East right now,
Right.
specifically, the dynamic between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, your first instinct is probably to reach for the standard tools.
Sure, yeah.
You put a map on the table.
Right.
You trace the borders.
Yeah.
You look at satellite images and troop movements from...
Oh, absolutely, because there is this baked-in expectation that if you just study the geometry of the situation, like the literal lines on the field, the conflict will eventually make sense. It gives us this comforting illusion that geopolitical conflicts are, like a game of chess.
Exactly.
A chess game.
Right. We want to believe it's played on a flat board, the pieces have defined roles, and all the moves are entirely rational.
Yeah.
And predictable.
But the reality on the ground just completely flips that chessboard over. The map actually doesn't help you much when the lines are totally blurred.
Yeah, they really are. And the key players are hidden behind layers of plausible deniability. And the standard ways we talk about war, like front lines, advances, retreats, they just completely fail to describe what's actually happening.
They fall short, yeah.
So today, we are putting away the maps. We're going to look at the one thing that might actually predict how the situation evolves, which is a dictionary.
Which sounds counterintuitive, I know. But when the physical geography becomes just too complex to map, you have to look at the linguistic geography.
Right.
You have to look at the tools people are actively using to construct their reality.
And that is exactly the mission of this deep dive. We're looking at a fascinating stack of linguistic analyses focused entirely on Russian media coverage of the Middle East.
Yes.
We're going to examine the very specific metaphors, the vocabulary, and even the literal grammar they use to describe the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Super interesting stuff.
By dissecting these words, we're going to gain a profound and honestly slightly unexpected perspective on how this geopolitical situation is framed.
But before we crack open the vocabulary, I do need to establish a really vital ground rule for us and for you listening.
Good idea.
Because our source material analyzes highly charged ongoing political and military events involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I want to be perfectly clear. We are examining the linguistic frameworks and media narratives present in our sources.
Only the sources, yeah.
Right. We are entirely impartial. We are not taking any sides, and we are certainly not endorsing any political viewpoints. Our sole goal is to translate and unpack the ideas exactly as they appear in the linguistic source material provided to us.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we are looking for the single most accurate, most descriptive Russian noun used to encapsulate this specific conflict, where do we start? Because I'm assuming it's not a basic word like war or battle.
No, far from it, actually. The primary visual metaphor that just totally dominates Russian political commentary is the word Klubok.
Klubok.
Yes, Klubok. Literally translated, a klubok is a ball of yarn, a tangle, or a knot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and if you are reading Russian geopolitical analysis, you will constantly see it deployed in phrases like Blizhnevostokny Klubok, which translates to the Middle East tangle, or Klubok protivrechyi, meaning a dead knot of contradictions.
A knot of contradictions. Wow.
Exactly. It is the absolute go-to term for describing a scenario where multiple factions, historical grievances, and overlapping interests are just, hopelessly wound together.
A ball of yarn. My mind immediately goes to, doing laundry.
The laundry.
Yeah, like when you pull a knitted sweater out of the wash, and you see this one loose thread sticking out of the sleeve.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. You think, I'll just pull this gently, snap it off, and the problem is solved.
Yeah.
But the moment you pull it, the tension violently shifts somewhere else.
Yes.
A loop you didn't even know was connected cinches down, the collar puckers, and suddenly the whole garment is tighter and significantly more ruined than before you touched it.
That is, that physical sensation you're describing, that frustrating realization that your deliberate action just triggered a totally unpredictable systemic reaction.
Yeah.
That is exactly why Russian analysts map this specific physical metaphor onto the U.S., Israel, and Iran dynamic.
Because it's all connected.
Right. The sources emphasize that this is a fundamentally non-linear conflict.
Meaning it's not just two armies lining up on a field in a straightforward one-on-one fight.
Exactly. The chessboard analogy breaks down entirely here. The conflict involves this vast, intricate web of proxies.
Like who?
Well, you have groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militias in Iraq and Syria.
Right.
And then you introduce the overarching shadow of nuclear ambitions. On top of that, you have centuries of historical and religious grievances.
It's so layered.
It is, all layered beneath modern great power games involving global superpowers. You just can't draw a clean line between point A and point B.
Because point A is like tied in a knot around point D, which is wrapped under point G.
Precisely. And that brings up a really defining Russian phrase highlighted in the sources, Rasputar odnu nit sechanyu vez ozol.
Let me guess.
Go for it.
To untangle one thread is to tighten the whole knot.
You nailed it.
Oh, wow. That perfectly mirrors the sweater analogy.
It's the defining characteristic of a Klubok. Striking one target in retaliation, or, trying to surgically remove one specific geopolitical threat, it doesn't actually solve the overarching issue.
It just pulls the thread.
Right. It triggers a global systemic pushback. The kinetic energy you put into pulling that one thread just transfers into the rest of the knot.
So it tightens everywhere else.
Exactly. The pressure tightens on everyone else involved, often in places completely geographically separated from the initial strike.
That is a deeply visceral image. But I want to push a little deeper into the language itself, because our sources don't just point out the visual imagery of the word, right?
They go much deeper.
They actually crack the word open and look at how it's built. And this is where I found the analysis getting, honestly, almost eerily psychological.
Yeah, we can look at the actual anatomy of the word Klubok to see how that psychology works. The base root of the word is klub.
Klub.
Right. In Russian, this root refers to a rolling mass, a sphere, or a ball. For instance, you might say klub daima to describe a thick rolling puff of smoke moving through the air.
Okay, a rolling spherical mass. That tracks with a ball of yarn.
It does. But Russian grammar modifies that root by adding the suffix OK.
Okay, so klub becomes klubok.
Yes. And in the Russian language, OK is a diminutive suffix.
Diminutive.
Yeah. It is typically used as an affectionate or endearing ending to make something sound smaller, cuter, or just more domestic.
Right, hang on. I have to challenge this a bit.
Sure.
Are we sure we aren't overanalyzing a basic grammar rule here? Because using an affectionate or diminutive suffix to describe a highly lethal, terrifying geopolitical crisis seems, well, incredibly counterintuitive.
I get why you'd say that.
Why take an event with global destructive consequences and make it sound like a quaint little toy you'd give a kitten to play with in the living room? I mean, isn't OK just a standard way words are formed?
It is a standard suffix, yes, but applying it to geopolitics is a highly deliberate choice of register. The irony you are sensing is entirely the point.
Really?
Yes. Linguistically, when you apply a diminutive domestic suffix to a geopolitical disaster, it engineers a very specific psychological effect on the audience.
By making it smaller.
Right. It scales down a terrifying, incomprehensible reality into something familiar.
So it's almost like a coping mechanism.
In a way, yeah, absolutely. A Klubok isn't framed as a grand, sweeping historical epoch that will define a generation. It is framed as a mundane, stubborn household annoyance.
A household annoyance.
But crucially, it is an annoyance you cannot escape. The diminutive suffix doesn't make the conflict less dangerous. It makes it feel deeply entrenched in everyday reality. It normalizes the chaos.
It takes the grandiosity out of war. It replaces the trumpets and the battle flags with this feeling of domestic entrapment.
That's a great way to put it. And that feeling of entrapment is then aggressively reinforced by the action verbs the media pairs with it.
What kind of verbs?
Well, the sources note that when Russian journalists describe military factions operating within this crisis, they frequently use the derivative verbs skrutivatsya and skrutivatsya.
How do those translate? Because, I mean, you can't exactly shoot a knot.
True. They translate to twisting tight, coiling up, or entangling.
Twisting tight.
Yeah. The media uses these specific verbs to describe factions sinking deeper into the mess. It implies an active, ongoing process of self-sabotage.
Wow.
The factions aren't just fighting an enemy, they are actively twisting themselves tighter into the knot.
So the action itself is self-defeating. If I'm a reader consuming this news, I'm internalizing an entire linguistic toolkit built around the idea that movement equals entrapment.
Yes. The sources actually provide that exact toolkit, like the fixed journalistic expressions that Russian reporters use daily.
Let's hear some.
Okay, so when a conflict reaches a sudden, violent flashpoint, the standard phrase isn't war broke out. It is zavyazatsya v Klubok, meaning it tangled into a knot.
The crisis tangled itself, the actors almost disappear, and the knot becomes the subject.
Exactly. Then, when diplomats fly in to try and find a political resolution, the media doesn't say they're solving the problem or negotiating peace.
They say they're untangling it.
Right. They report that diplomats are trying to Rasputin's Klubok, untangle the yarn. But as we established with the sweater analogy, pulling those threads usually just leads to the most common noun phrase in Russian political journalism.
Which is
Klubok protivrechий, a tangle of contradictions.
knowing how this grammar functions, it really makes me wonder why this specific linguistic structure became the absolute default.
That's a good question.
Because it's not like the Russian language lacks other words for violence or war.
Hey.
They could use simpler terms.
They absolutely could. And to understand the why, we have to look at the competing vocabulary that the media actively chooses not to use for deep analysis.
Like what?
For example, Russian media could easily lean on the word escalatsya.
Escalation, which is the buzzword we hear constantly in Western media. Everything is an escalation or a de-escalation.
Right. But in Russian, escalatsya is a direct loanword. It feels sterile, a bit academic, and imported.
Okay, what about a more native word?
Well, on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, reporters could use a word like zamzy, which is a highly colloquial slang term.
What does that mean?
It roughly translates to a chaotic brawl, a meat grinder, or just a bloody mess.
It's like a chaotic bar fight where everyone is just throwing punches in the dark.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is that serious political analysts generally avoid both escalation and zamzy in favor of Klubok.
Why avoid them?
The psychological underpinning behind that choice is what analysts call pessimistic realism.
Pessimistic realism. Yeah. The Russian media and the Russian public by extension operate from a background of prolonged historical military conflicts. They possess a long cultural memory of wars that drag on for years, mutating and shifting without any clear, definitive resolutions.
So they aren't looking for a quick fix, and their language reflects that lack of expectation.
Exactly.
Let me try to synthesize this, because I think I'm seeing a massive gap between how different cultures fundamentally frame the concept of conflict.
Go for it.
When we in the West use a word like escalation, it inherently implies a structure. It implies a ladder.
A ladder is a perfect way to visualize it.
Right. You escalate, you climb up the rungs of tension, you deploy a carrier group, you move up a rung, you launch a strike, you move up another rung.
Yes.
But theoretically, because it is a ladder, you can step back down. There's a mechanism for de-escalation built into the very geometry of the word.
That's spot on.
It requires conscious effort to climb up, and you can consciously choose to climb down. The latter implies a rational pathway out. It implies that human agency is in control of the structure.
But Klubok completely removes that agency. A knot implies a trap.
Right.
It has this highly visual imagery that signals to the public immediately the situation is muddy, it is long-term, and fundamentally it lacks a single, clean solution. There is no ladder to climb down.
No ladder at all.
You are just in the knot, and as we discussed, the harder you struggle, the tighter it gets.
You are identifying the core difference in worldview right there. And since Klubok establishes this baseline mindset of entrapment, the sources zoom out to show us what happens when the situation deteriorates further.
It's worse.
It does. If the knot is the baseline, what happens when the violence actually spikes? The sources highlight two other high-frequency mirror words that complete this grim geopolitical lexicon.
Okay, let's explore those. If the first state of chaos is a static knot that you're trapped in, how does the vocabulary change when the shooting starts and things get highly volatile?
The vocabulary shifts from something static to something terrifyingly dynamic. The next term is Voronka.
Voronka.
Translated literally, it means a funnel, a crater, or a vortex.
The vortex.
Yes. In the news, you will frequently see the phrase Voronka eskalacji, the vortex of escalation.
A vortex.
Oh.
That changes the physics of the situation entirely.
How so?
It makes me think of a whirlpool in the ocean or a black hole in space. A funnel implies gravity. It implies a dynamic, unstoppable downward process where all parties are actively being sucked into the center.
Notice how different that is from a ladder.
Completely different. On a ladder, you stop moving if you just stand still. But in a vortex, standing still means you get pulled under.
Exactly.
You might be swimming as hard as you can away from the center of the whirlpool, desperately trying to de-escalate, but the current is just too strong. You're sinking deeper, entirely unable to extract yourself, regardless of your intentions.
The removal of intent is the terrifying part of the Voronka metaphor. A knot just sits there, tightly bound, but a Voronka is actively dragging you down against your will.
That is horrifying.
It is. And that perfectly sets up the third term in this triad, which describes what happens when you finally reach the absolute bottom of that vortex.
What is it?
The word is clinch.
Clinch.
Yeah.
That sounds exactly like an English loanword, like a clinch in a boxing match.
It is borrowed directly from boxing terminology, yeah. A clinch is that twisted, exhausted embrace between two fighters. In Russian geopolitical news, it becomes politicheski clinch, a political clinch.
Okay, I know a clinch from boxing, but usually that's just a tactical hug.
Right.
Fighters do it to catch their breath or force the referee to break them apart.
Yeah.
How does a sports tactic map onto a highly lethal systemic war in the Middle East?
Well, to map it onto the Middle East, you have to look at a clinch not as a break in the action, but as a state of mutual strangulation.
Mutual strangulation.
Yeah. Think about two heavyweight boxers, but put them in the final round of a brutal fight. They are battered, they are bleeding, they are utterly exhausted.
Right.
They fall into each other and wrap their arms around one another. Neither side has the energy, the leverage, or the positioning to deliver a knockout blow.
So the fight is effectively paused.
No, the fight is grinding.
Yeah.
Neither side can deliver a knockout, but crucially, neither side can afford to step back and retreat.
Why not?
Because the moment you drop your arms and step back, you leave your chin completely open to a devastating attack.
Oh. So you were forced to hold on to the person who was actively trying to destroy you.
You just hold on. It is a state of pure, grinding, mutual exhaustion. The actors in a geopolitical clinch are essentially using their enemies to stay standing while simultaneously trying to crush each other's ribs in the dark.
Wow.
And there is no referee to separate them.
That is incredibly bleak. But when you lay it all out, it perfectly sums up the three states of geopolitical chaos our sources have provided.
It really does.
It's a terrifyingly complete progression of how to view a crisis. First, you have the Klubok, the structural mess, the domestic ball of yarn where every historical thread is tangled and pulling one ruins the others.
Yes.
Then, when things accelerate, you enter the Voronka, the dynamic pull, the vortex sucking everyone inward against their will, stripping away their agency.
The vortex of escalation, right.
And finally, when everyone is dragged to the bottom, you end up in the clinch, the physical stalemate, the exhausted, inescapable embrace where you can't win, but you can't let go.
It is a profound framework for understanding conflict. It completely strips away the Western illusion of easy victories, surgical strikes, or clean diplomatic resolutions.
It forces you to look at the mess for what it actually is.
Exactly, through the lens of a culture and a media ecosystem that expects conflicts to be deeply entrenched, highly complex, and stubbornly resistant to quick fixes.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? We've spent this entire deep dive looking halfway across the world, dissecting Russian grammar to try and understand the Middle East. But the real underlying takeaway here is how language fundamentally builds our reality. When you understand the words a culture uses, whether it's a knot, a vortex, or a ladder, you understand how they view the very possibility of peace.
That's the core of it.
You realize that the vocabulary we choose doesn't just describe the world around us, it actively shapes the boundaries of what we believe is possible.
And that raises an important question, something for you to consider long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
If Russian linguistic structures naturally frame global conflicts as unwinnable, inescapable tangles and vortexes, you have to ask yourself, how does the specific vocabulary used in your daily local news silently engineer your own optimism or pessimism about the world's future?
Oh, that's a great question.
Does the language you consume over your morning coffee make peace seem like a rational puzzle waiting to be solved? Or does it silently condition you to feel like it's a knot that can never, ever be undone?
It really brings us right back to that map and the expectation of clear lines.
Yeah.
We want simple diagnoses. We want to point to a bad guy and a good guy.
Of course we do.
But maybe the very first step to actually untangling the mess is admitting that we're dealing with the ball of yarn, not a chessboard.